Hey, what's up everybody? This is Oseberg501 and today I want to go over what you can expect from the endgame of Diablo 4. So I recently ran a poll asking people what information they would be interested in learning about Diablo 4, and one of the first comments on this was the endgame. And the reason I want to go over this first is because I've also seen this from a lot of other places, especially after the game's release date was officially revealed. A ton of new people coming into the Diablo 4 community and wanting to learn about the endgame. A lot of people who haven't been following the development of the game over these years. So I wanted to go over pretty much all the content you can expect that we know about for the endgame of Diablo 4, and I also wanted to go over post-launch content because Diablo 4 is going to be a live service game. And from all the information we have, it seems like post-launch content is going to be a massive focus for the development. And also keep in mind, this is all of the endgame content we know of. There have been hints that there may be some additional endgame stuff on release of the game. We're still around 5 months from launch, so there could potentially be more stuff in the game on release day. Now to start off, we have the open world before the endgame. And the reason I wanted to make this distinction is because there's going to be a lot of content that you're able to do while leveling up that's also going to be very important for the endgame and is going to be content you're going to still be progressing through once you get into the later stages of the game. And this includes a ton of different open world features. You just have exploration, so finding all the dungeons, finding all the different towns, finding all the different teleporters. Then you have it taking over all the camps, which will then turn into additional smaller settlements. Then you have the renown system, which is essentially zone completion rewards, which will unlock you permanent account-wide rewards, including stats, additional potion slots. So a lot of this stuff is going to be incredibly important, even though you're doing it from right when you start the game. And with the world tier system, which we're going to go over in this video as well, all of this content is also going to be progressing with you to always make it viable and useful into the end game. Then you also have some additional stuff that kind of fits in with that in the forms of gathering. So gathering resources just from plants and mines, and then gathering resources off of certain creatures. And then you also have stuff like world bosses that are also going to give some very important resources. And before we go any further, we have to go over world tiers. Now these are pretty simple. You're going to have 5 world tiers on launch, 2 of which you get to choose between when you first start the game. And essentially going up world tiers increases the difficulty of everything and will give you much more rewards. So more gold, more XP, better drops, more drops, everything you would expect. It's a pretty similar system to say torments from Diablo 3, except I think they're going to generally be a bit better for the game as a whole. And also once you get into the higher world tiers that you unlock, once you get into the end game, those will also start to drop basically higher rolled variations of gear, which are called sacred or ancestral gear pieces. So getting to, I would say, 3 to 5 is going to be incredibly important for the end game. And this is also going to be a system that allows all of that open world content to also still be useful into the end game. And off the back of that, we have another endgame system called Helltides. So while roaming Sanctuary on foot or atop your trusty steed, be aware of your surroundings, for you might find yourself caught in a Helltide. This is a new region-wide event that becomes available to heroes only once they have reached World Tier 3, which is Nightmare difficulty. In a Helltide, the servants of Lilith are empowered, having their difficulty increased, but dropping loot worthy of the danger. Her mightiest minions are also out in greater force, and the very ground of Sanctuary as you know it has been morphed by the surge in demonic activity. As you call the monstrosities inhabiting a Helltide, they'll potentially drop cinders, a new currency that can be spent opening Helltide chests. These chests are scattered throughout the respective region that the Helltide is in, and these chests boast bountiful boons exclusive to a singular item slot such as torso, legs, or a two-handed weapon. But be wary in hoarding your cinders. Should you fall in battle, they'll drop and must be reclaimed. So as mentioned, you need to be in World Tier 3, so you're going to be more into the end game to be able to start playing Helltides, and this is tying very heavily into that open world content because a whole region can be turned into a Helltide. It's going to be completely morphed, so it's going to look quite a bit different. And all of Lilith's servants are going to be invading the zone. They're going to be empowered. There's going to be these big lieutenants or bosses roaming around the zone. And everything you kill in the zone is going to drop you a new currency that you can use to open chests to target farm specific item slots. So like mentioned, torso, legs, or a two-handed weapon. So once you get enough cinders, you could go open a chest that only gives two-handed weapons, and this would allow you to target farm gear much more easily, which is a very big boon when you're gearing into the end game. And this is another way to where the open world of Diablo 4 is going to continuously play a big part in the end game. And like I mentioned, exploration is going to play a big part in the open world, and one of the things you're going to be finding while exploring are the many dungeons of Diablo 4, and there are going to be over 120 dungeons on launch that all have their own specific entrance that you'll have to travel to enter. They'll all look like their own specific dungeon, play like their own specific dungeon. They're not going to be completely randomized like Rifts of Diablo 3, and they're also only going to have up to 2 different monster families in that specific dungeon. But once you get into the end game, you're also able to obtain nightmare sigils that turn that dungeon into an end game version of that dungeon called Nightmare Dungeons, and this is going to be a very big part of the end game and especially of gearing up into the end game. Now we have some new information on Nightmare Sigils. Originally, the only information that we had was you would be getting these Nightmare Sigils, which are the keys to turn dungeons into Nightmare Dungeons, from another endgame system called Whispers of the Dead, which is basically a bounty system, and we'll go over that as well. But now we also know you're able to actually craft these from one of the NPCs in the game, and there's going to be different tiers of Nightmare Sigils, and all of the dungeons are going to be placed in one of these different Nightmare Sigil tiers. So you're not going to be able to play every dungeon with every different tier of Nightmare Sigils, but every dungeon will still have sigils that apply to them, so every dungeon will still be useful into the end game. And we also recently got some new information that ties into dungeons, and that's the Codex of Power. Now this is something you're able to do while leveling up, but it's going to be very important for gearing up in the end game as well. And the Codex of Power is essentially a way to permanently unlock legendary powers. There's going to be 115 legendary powers you can unlock through the Codex, which isn't all legendary powers, but you're able to unlock these powers that give you infinite uses, and it's just going to take gold to apply these powers to an item. And these legendary powers are obtained by completing whatever dungeon is tied to that power. But in the Codex of Power, all the legendary powers are the lowest rolled version of those legendary powers. So legendary powers, like normal affixes, can roll in a range. Say for instance, you have a legendary power can roll from 10 to 35%. In the Codex of Power, it'd always be 10%. So it's going to be very good for leveling up into getting into the end game. But once you get crazy geared, maybe you're level 100, the Codex of Power is not going to be used as much, but it's still going to be a very important part of gearing up new characters, and especially an important part of every new season. So Nightmare Dungeons are going to play an incredibly important role in the end game. It's going to be something you're going to be grinding quite a lot, and the Nightmare Sigils that turn dungeons into Nightmare Dungeons are also going to just give a ton of different augments and amplifiers and affixes to these dungeons. Now we don't know a lot of the specifics of what these sigils are going to do, but we could expect them to make dungeons harder, probably spawn more enemies, and then give you different buffs to say gold, XP, drops, even maybe specific drops so you can target farm dungeons, and generally just transform these dungeons into kind of a mix between Diablo 3 Rifts and World of Warcraft Mythic Dungeon keys. And like mentioned, you're going to need to be obtaining Nightmare Sigils to turn dungeons into Nightmare Dungeons. And one of the ways you're able to do this are called Whispers of the Dead. The Tree of Whispers has a few loose ends to tie and needs your help settling the score. Displayed on your map, players will see various whispers scattered throughout Sanctuary. Complete the associated task and be met with experience, gold, and grim favors. The number of grim favors you receive from completing a whisper varies, but once you've collected 10 Grim Favors from the dearly departed, they can be exchanged at the Tree of Whispers for a bevy of loot and experience. The types of whispers a player sees on their map rotate frequently, with new ones becoming available throughout the day for you to track. Each whisper will offer both a different set of rewards and experience for completing it. Traditionally, the Whispers of the Dead system does not become available to players until completing a specific chapter of the main questline. So this system is essentially going to be the replacement for bounties from Diablo 3, but how they're doing this system, it seems more like a mix of bounties from Diablo 3 and world quests from World of Warcraft. So once you have this unlocked, you're going to see a bunch of objectives all over the map. They're going to be rotating a handful of times during the day. You'll get tons of rewards for doing them themselves, and you'll be getting Grim Favors. And once you have enough Grim Favors, you can turn it in for a ton of loot. Now, this is also where you should be able to be obtaining Nightmare Sigils. And from the sounds of it, this is a way you're going to be obtaining most of the Nightmare Sigils you're going to be getting. So this is going to be a pretty important system to start allowing access to those nightmare dungeons. And they're also going to give you quite a lot of new content because they're going to be new objectives all over the regions of the game. Again, tying into the open world of Diablo 4 being very important even into the end game. Now, while you're doing these Whispers of the Dead, you may come across Fields of Hatred. Now, this is going to be the PvP zones in Diablo 4. So essentially how these work is there will be specific designated areas that once you enter, you'll get a warning that you have entered a Field of Hatred, and you're able to freely PvP anybody else in the zone that you're not grouped up with. So you are able to group up and go fight as a group in PvP. Now, there's still going to be PvE creatures, chests, and potentially different objectives in these Fields of Hatred, and doing pretty much anything in Field of Hatred. So killing players, killing creatures, doing objectives, anything you do is going to give you Seeds of Hatred. And this is going to be one of the currencies for the PvP zone. Now, these Seeds of Hatred are able to be dropped once you're killed. So if you're carrying a bunch of seeds and you die, someone can come loot them from you. But you can turn these Seeds of Hatred into red dust, which then turns them into a permanent currency that you're not able to lose. And you're able to spend these on different PvP vendors that are going to have tons of different cosmetics you're able to unlock and potentially gear. Now, we're not exactly sure if you're actually able to buy gear, because in the past they did say you would be able to do this. It would obviously just be another way to get gear and not be better gear, but we're not exactly sure on how that's going to end up playing out on launch. But to turn these Seeds of Hatred into red dust, you have to go to an altar of extraction. Now, once you're extracting these, everybody will be able to see you're doing this. So this is also going to cause other players to want to come and attack you and kill you, take your seeds before they're turned into red dust. And there's also going to be some other systems tied into the Fields of Hatred, such as a kind of bounty system where if one player is just destroying everybody else in the zone, they will have a bounty placed on them that gives you a lot more rewards for going and defeating them. And obviously, since it's PvP, there's basically no cutoff. You'll probably be able to go in these at lower level, and then you'll be able to go in these at level 100 with full best in slot gear, and a lot of people will do that. There will definitely be some people that fully focus on these PvP Fields of Hatred, and that will be a significant part of their end game. So that's a majority of the actual content you can expect for the endgame of Diablo 4. But like I mentioned, there's a pretty good possibility that there will be new content for the endgame on launch of Diablo 4. But this also doesn't go over a lot of the systems that are also going to play into the endgame. And this is pretty much everything around building your character. All the stuff we just went over is going to help you in doing this. But at the end of the day, building up your character, gearing it, making different builds is one of the biggest parts of any ARPG. So to lump that all together, you have your class specific skill trees with all the customization that that's going to allow for. You have all of your different gear. You have the different vendors that also will allow you to augment and upgrade all your different gear. And then at level 50, which is when you pretty much start the end game, you're also going to be getting Paragon boards, which are these big end game boards that you unlock Paragon points for. They allow you to go throughout these boards, getting new effects, new stats, and making making this big checkered board of different Paragon boards connected together. And this is going to play heavily into creating your builds into the end game. So all of this stuff is going to play into creating your build, which isn't specifically content, but this is going to be a primary reason why you're doing a lot of content. And this is going to be a primary thing to allow you to continue to do harder and harder content. But that's not where the story ends, because Diablo 4, unlike Diablo 3, is going to be a game focused on having a lot of endgame content on release, but also being a live service game that's constantly updated and constantly getting new content added. And the end game is something that the developers have said they are very heavily focused on, not only for the launch of the game, but also future seasons and expansions. So a few weeks after the launch of Diablo 4, we're getting Season 1. Now the developers have said they're aiming to have a new season every 3 months, which will mean 4 seasons every single year, and new seasons are going to add a ton of content. They're going to add live events, which are essentially just different things that will change up the gameplay in some way in certain areas. One of the examples they gave was the Drowned invading a specific area, so that'll change up that area of a region and give you some new content to do. But there's also going to be a ton of new content that will affect every part of Diablo 4 for every new season. To start off, you're going to be getting a ton of new story content that will continue progressing the story of Diablo 4, and this will also be something you're going to be playing through for every new season as you level up a new character. Then with every new season, there's going to be a new gameplay mechanic or feature. If you've played or followed Path of Exile, this seems to be taking a bit of inspiration from that, where they want something new, some new big feature that makes you want to play that new season, which I pretty much guarantee will always have some effect on the end game. Then they're also going to be adding in new gear, so new legendary items, new unique items. And they're going to be constantly changing the balance of classes and gear pieces for every new season to try to change up the meta to allow new builds to be used. And there's probably going to be more tweaks, more changes, and more content added with each season, but we're also going to be having big expansions at some point down the road. I would probably expect every 1 to 2 years to get a new expansion, and new expansions are going to be much more substantial bits of content. So this is where I would expect there would be new classes if we're going to be getting new classes in that specific expansion. So if we ever get a Crusader, that would be in an expansion. If we ever get a Monk, that would be in an expansion. And while that's not specifically endgame content, a new class just adds a ridiculous amount of variation on playing already existing content. Then I would fully expect there's going to be a lot of new open world play space with every new expansion. I would expect probably a new region size piece of content with those expansions. So a massive new area, probably specifically themed on something. Like my theory for the first expansion is a heaven or holy base expansion. So it would be a new holy themed area or actually traveling to heaven and having that be a playable space. And then I would fully expect massive new features that heavily change up the game in those expansions. And like mentioned, the developers have said that a lot of Diablo 4, especially post-launch, is going to be focused on endgame. So I'd probably expect there to always be new big endgame features for every expansion as well. But going through all of this information on all of the content, all the things that are going to play into the end game, one thing that is definitely true is that Diablo 4 is going to have a lot more end game content than Diablo 3 did, and I think that's a definite plus. Because Diablo 3 was originally released as a game that would just be released, really wouldn't be updated, and Diablo 3 released with basically no endgame content. There wasn't any endgame specific content for Diablo 3 on launch, but that is definitely something they're not doing with Diablo 4. So if you were a player of Diablo 3 and you want some information to see if Diablo 4 would have an endgame, I think you're probably going to be pretty happy with the offerings of Diablo 4. So that's pretty much all I want to go over. So subscribe if you want to see more Diablo 4 or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about the end game of Diablo 4. And thanks for watching.